Johnny Harris, a famous YouTuber and journalist, has made a video recently about the Russians fleeing censorship and fighting the regime using YouTube. And in this video, Johnny got so many things wrong and missed so many important details that for me as a Ukrainian, it was incredibly hard to watch. To be clear, I'm a big fan of Johnny myself, and I adore his journalistic work and what he's doing on YouTube. He made some great and balanced pieces on the Russian war in Ukraine and did a great job covering European colonialism, for instance. Because of this, I was even more surprised why a journalist like Johnny Harris could misunderstand so much about propaganda and Russian imperialism. And it is actually a great example of how destructive and propagandistic narratives can penetrate even the most pro-democratic discussions, exploiting the popular misconceptions which we don't even notice sometimes. And Russian propaganda in the West is really a great example of how it can be done and how it can lead to catastrophic consequences. So let's go. The video tells a story of how the Russian state has been slowly tightening the grip on freedom of speech, introducing foreign agent law, banning the independent TV channels, and persecuting for anti-government speech, and how brave Russian dissidents are using YouTube to fight the regime and create an effective alternative to the state propaganda.
Единственное, что, конечно, вначале мы никак не могли понять, что нам делать со словом «война», потому что нам запретили его произносить.
There is a lot to deconstruct here. Throughout the 36 minutes video, there are lots of teeny tiny misconceptions or poorly researched facts or guessed backgrounds, which together build up into a huge pile of Russian bullshit. And it wouldn't matter otherwise, but Russian bullshit is the exact reason why Russians are killing Ukrainians right now, and why Russians not only don't stop it, most of them actively participate and support it.
He got this guy to become president for 4 years, while Putin, became the prime minister. And this was a good time for the Russian economy, which was opening up to foreign investment, and the economy was growing nicely.
Johnny starts by telling the story of Putin's presidency and how he came back to power in 2012 after a 4-year substitution by his minion Medvedev. And don't get me wrong, I know the video is not about Medvedev or his presidency, but it is about Russia and its society, and in the circumstances we are in right now, it would be fair to remind that in 2008, Russia invaded Georgia and nearly destroyed the country. Yet just like in 2014 in Ukraine, Russia tried to restore its empire and ended up occupying 20% of this small innocent country. They killed several hundreds of Georgians in 3 days and made hundreds of thousands flee their homes.
This new president of Russia sat with President Obama and had like a burger and fries here in Washington, D.C. in an effort to reset relations between the two countries.
So yeah, this cheeseburger eating with Obama didn't help Russia to stop being an evil empire. But anyway, remember it, and this information will be important later when we'll gather all the pieces.
But while Putin was taking this little 4-year break, he was not loving all of this. As the 2012 election approached, he needed to get back into the top job. So he convinced this president not to run again.
Yeah, also, Putin was not loving it. He was effectively ruling the country and doing all the dark stuff while trying to fool Westerners with his fake reload. And he did not convince Medvedev because he didn't have to. Then Johnny goes and interviews dozens of Russians, including Russian bloggers and journalists who complain about the foreign agent list and how this bureaucratic barrier censored their speech.
All types of media outlets, bloggers, TV channels, and even newspapers that don't support Putin's Ukraine invasion are labeled as foreign agents.
Which in Russian sounds more like foreign spy.
So yeah, foreign agent list, which is no doubt is a very important piece of the Russian censorship machine. But again, couple of misconceptions here. First, the Russian censorship machine did not start in 2012. It actually began much earlier. You could hardly find an opposition TV channel in Russia in 2003 already, and by 2008 there was only one, which Johnny actually talks about later.
Eventually, there's only one non-state TV channel standing.
Хотите, чтобы мы остались в эфире? Поддержите дождь.
And it is very important because most Russian journalists working in the Russian media, apart from several outlets, participated in Russian war crimes, just like those who promote killing of Ukrainians today. In Chechnya, in Georgia, and in Ukraine, the Russian state massacred people, made them flee their homes, and destroyed the cities and lives of the whole peoples. In 1994, 2000, 2008, 2014, all those things were happening already, and Russian media served the Russian state, promoting wars, dehumanizing those who Russian soldiers will later kill without any remorse. And even if you did like comedy show on a Russian state TV, you actually attracted audience to this propaganda and normalized genocides.
Я порубил зелень как красный комиссар жителей украинской деревни и готов. Вы почистили мой клинок.
Ну, я просто останки жителей
стряхиваю. Итак.
So yeah, Johnny makes it look like Russia became bad in 2012, but what about those dead people before? Another detail is that they didn't kind of censor most of the opposition voices up until the start of the full-scale invasion. They could not participate in Russian state TV like almost forever, sure, but apart from that, not much has changed. There was violence and some rate of persecution, but most of the Russian political YouTube operated pretty well up until the start of the full-scale war.
I watch this stuff and I don't fully know how to make sense of it. It doesn't fit into any box that I'm used to. These videos are super long. We're talking like hour and 56 minutes, 12 million views. Hour and 54 minutes, 22 million views.
And of course, most of them fled afterwards because of many risks of being in Russia and real tightening of the regime, and like because you could not name war. But they all were pretty much okay when it was forbidden to deny that Crimea belongs to Russia, for instance.
Если вы станете президентом, вы попробуете вернуть Крым Украине?
Крым — это что, бутерброд с колбасой, чтобы вот туда-сюда возвращать?
Оказалось, что да.
Вот я не считаю.
TV Rain, that opposition TV channel we talked earlier, showed the map of Russia with Crimea on air and on their website, talked about the national border between Crimea and Ukraine, acknowledging its annexation, and generally they made some anti-Ukrainian stuff, which even made the Ukrainian government to ban TV Rain in Ukraine. And Crimea is important because it is a manifestation of Russian imperialism and generally Putin's triumph, because it appeared that everything the Russian people ever wanted was territorial expansion, war, and subjugation of lesser peoples. And Johnny Harris seems to catch one thing right here.
Here in the West, we saw this land grab and we were like, what is happening? This is so terrible. But the fact is, most Russians loved this. I mean, look at this guy's popularity. It springs up to an all-time high after he invades and steals land.
Yeah, but then he talks about how Vladimir Putin is a charismatic leader and how he found an appealing message and blah, blah, blah.
He is a strong, magnetic leader.
He kind of misses the point now. Putin is neither a strong nor magnetic leader. What the fuck? He is a gangster and a maniac. Although Putin is not a problem. He's a symptom of a sick imperialistic Russian society.
Because we don't understand his language and he just looks like a villain. But many Russians, a lot of them who remember the chaos of the post-Soviet years, see Putin as a strong leader.
And if Johnny Harris wanted the real reasons why people cheered the occupation of the other country, he could ask them on one of his interviews he made with Russians for his video.
Another pioneer in this space is Irina Shikman, who I got to talk to for this story. Irina came from TV as well. She was like a traditional host who took the leap to go to YouTube and found freedom.
Here, Johnny talks to Irina Shikman, ex-journalist of the most notorious Russian propaganda machine NTV channel, who worked there till 2017. Remember a moment ago when we talked about what it meant working on this media? Yeah, so Irina is a great dissident, but if you ask her about Crimea...
Крым чей? Вот этот вопрос, видимо, все-таки прозвучал.
Я просто не понимаю, это очень странный вопрос, потому что я понимаю, что крымчане, то есть вот люди в Крыму сказали, что да, мы хотим быть с Россией. Ну, как бы, окей, я понимаю этих людей.
Yeah, the referendum she's talking about was, of course, fake, and she was generally happy about this land grab. She de facto supports Putin in this imperialism. She just didn't like how it played out. It's like supporting ISIS because you hate gay people, but then complaining about them burning people in cages. Oh, and yeah, working for ISIS for like 15 years. But anyway, Johnny then makes a small segment about the Russian propaganda, the segment where he got so many things wrong and which is so important actually, that I decided to record this video, and sorry, I will have to talk about it bit by bit.
Every country has totally polarized, slanted television. Like here in the US, we have news channels that are totally slanted to one side or the other and will often just toe the line of whoever's in power if they align with their views. Like this Russian guy spewing propaganda on Russian state TV kind of doesn't sound that different to like Tucker Carlson talking about Donald Trump. The reality is that all information has a bent, has a bias.
Yeah, no, Tucker Carlson is of course a phenomenal piece of shit, but this guy you just showed calls on air to kill millions of people.
Предупредить мирных. Сказать. 24 часа, 48 часов. Начнем поквартально уничтожать. Николаев? Так уничтожить Николаев. Всем выйти мирным из Харькова, из Николаева, из Одессы. 3 дня. Если это не будет сделано, сносим квартал за кварталом.
He's like fucking Joseph Goebbels calling for Holocaust. You can compare them, but they are different, and we made a whole video on it, translating Russian propaganda specifically so people in the West could see it, and you can click it on the link in the description below or in the pop-up banner. I bet you will be fucking shocked by this content.
I don't speak Russian, which is a big bummer because I really wanted to just like watch a bunch of Russian TV and like see what it feels like.
Well, actually, you could do that. There are people who are working their asses off so that journalists like you could access this information. Like Julia Davis, subscribe to her Twitter and watch the best of this madness every day. But instead...
Luckily, Putin's government has me covered. Check this out.
The U.S. plan is to drag this war out as long as they possibly can.
Oh, fuck. He goes to watch Russia Today in English.
The Russian government has built a full-blown international news outlet that is Russian state TV, but in English and a bunch of other languages.
For those of you who don't know, Russia Today is not a copy of Russian television. It is a propaganda for the Westerners, specifically designed to influence people like Johnny Harris. They play on the feelings of the Western leftists, hosting people like Noam Chomsky.
Today we discuss the state of the American empire with Professor Noam Chomsky.
We just saw...
And then Western fascists featuring Tucker Carlson or whatnot.
The anti-hero of the year. Oh, and look, we've got Tucker Carlson.
And the main aim of this propaganda is so Johnny Harris would question his reality. They don't want Johnny to go kill Ukrainians. They twist information in such a way so he would just feel like there's no objective truth, but only sides and opinions. And there's no good and no bad, and therefore you don't have to support any side. And god damn it, he does exactly that.
This stuff is super valuable, actually, because not only does it teach us what propaganda looks like, but it also gives us an alternative view on how these events are being seen, which is really helpful for questioning your own biases and trying to make sense of how information works in this world.
This is exactly the problem. Russian propaganda is not an alternative view. It is a propaganda. It is a lie. Like that the NATO provoked Russian invasion. This is a lie and not a view angle. It is not an opinion. A lie is a lie. And then there's the truth, which is real and objective. Russia invaded Ukraine because it wanted to reassemble an empire. And there are people who try to report the truth, and they sometimes do bad stuff or make mistakes. Like you, Johnny, you made a bunch of mistakes, but still are on the good side and doing a great job. And then there are people whose aim is to deceive the audience and to help bad people commit their crimes and escape responsibility. And this stuff kills people.
It shows you the kind of cherry picking of facts and interpretations that they're able to do on their side, and then you start to see the same type of cherry picking that media companies here in the West do for the worldview that suits them.
What kind of cherry picking are you talking about? He shows screenshots of news of bomb theater in Mariupol, where children were hiding from Russian constant bombing, which had a sign on it, huge sign saying children, and Russia deliberately bombed it, killing hundreds. Where the fuck is cherry picking?
And you start to realize that all journalism is at some point cherry picking.
No, it is not.
It's a lot easier for me to publish a story to you about how bad Vladimir Putin is than to cover, I don't know, the potential war crimes committed by Ukrainian soldiers against Russian soldiers recently based on a video that the New York Times broke.
Oh, can I explain to you why you didn't cover the Ukrainian war crimes against Russian soldiers? Let's see. Russia has invaded a sovereign country, annexed its territories, opened concentration camps where they torture and rape people, razed several cities to the ground, killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, made various war crimes such as holding people in the basement for 70 days without air and food, raping children on their mother's eyes. Russia has kidnapped thousands of Ukrainian children and sent them to the re-education camps. They also blew up like 60 Ukrainian prisoners of war when they were asleep. And that's like, I don't know, 10% of everything they did. And then what was that? Oh yeah, the New York Times article about Ukrainian war crime against Russian soldiers, where during the surrender, one of the Russians opened fire, which is a war crime itself, by the way, wounded the Ukrainian military, and in response, the Ukrainian machine gunner opened fire in the direction of all the Russians, effectively killing them. The article was kinda controversial because it didn't include an opinion of a real military expert who would describe the rules of conduct in such a situation. Instead, the medical expert specializing in epidemiology conducted that each Russian was shot in the head. Instead, on videos and photos, you can clearly see that this is not true. So much cherry picking, right? And yeah, of course, there are like 500,000 of Ukrainians fighting for their own survival and survival of their families and country, enraged by what Russia has done to them and their loved ones. Of course, some of them could commit war crimes. Those happen during wars, although it is not systematic, unlike those happening from the Russian side, and therefore does not matter as much as a genocide. Ukrainians are on their land defending it from fucking evil, and those Russian soldiers should not even be there in the first place. This is how truth sounds like. Go check it yourself if you don't believe me or thousands of good journalists risking their lives on the battlefield. That is why you shouldn't have done a video on Ukrainian war crimes.
Watching Russian TV, it's not something I recommend, but I'm saying that this propaganda can help wake us up to what sensors we need to have on when we're ingesting information. So yeah, stay skeptical and curious and resist the urge of just blind side taking.
And that's exactly the problem. For God's sake, if truth sounds one-sided to you, maybe it is because it is. If the idea that Adolf Hitler is a bad guy sounds too one-sided, it doesn't mean that you should go and search for some literature about how Jews are evil and should be exterminated. Fuck. And then Johnny goes on about poor Russians who were deprived of their rights and could not monetize their YouTube anymore or something like that, showing Russians who literally supported the invasion of Georgia or annexation of Crimea as somehow hero journalists and politicians who fight the system and gain millions of views on YouTube and provide decent alternative to the Russian regime, and not making one important conclusion from his own research, that none of it helped. Despite hundreds of millions of views, most Russians still support the war. Hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of them directly participate in it, willingly. And the opposition is not growing. And if you talk to these dissident Russians, they probably told him that most of their relatives consciously choose Russian propaganda despite having an alternative. And for each of his young anti-Putin interviews, there are at least 4 of their pro-war relatives.
If you like a Russian grandma and like you cooking dinner and oh, there's TV on the background, this is just like their only source of news, like television.
Not because they could not find good information, but because they rose in a sick imperialistic fascist culture, which praises Russian Empire, promotes hate towards minorities, and basically is a death cult praising wars. When they had a real choice and pluralism of thought, they've chosen this, and they will again. And one last thing which made me really curious. I've seen probably every Johnny Harris video about Ukraine, and there was only one real interview with a real Ukrainian for like 10 seconds.
There is an incredible sense of unity here. The morale is very high.
Suddenly, here, Johnny has like 3/4 of the video of Russians speaking their mind. And it seems like a kind of imperialistic approach to Ukraine which people in the West show even now, despite Ukrainians proving their subjectivity every day. Like, who wants to listen to this primitive countryman without great culture with Dostoevsky and Tolstoy? Here instead, let's talk to dozens of those Russians who did not change a single thing in their country ever, and did not achieve anything but millions of YouTube views from their weak-willed fellow citizens. Johnny ends his video with a really good thought, that people in the West should appreciate the freedom of speech they have.
And I guess what I'm feeling a lot of right now is just gratitude. That I can say whatever I want to say here, and I don't have a big, powerful, scary government telling me that I'm a foreign agent or that I'm not allowed to say that. I take that for granted, and I don't think I should.
Lots of young Americans think that they live in some kind of an informational dictatorship or something, but in fact, they don't know what real dictatorship and tyranny feels like, and I hope they never will. And for that, people, journalists like Johnny Harris or New York Times should fight for the truth and not some kind of a balance between truth and lies. Thank you and goodbye.